We had a couple upsets this week in the college football landscape, although the top portion of the AP Top 25 remains unchanged. I will be running through that, tackling your Week 5 watch guide, updating my current Top 25, and hitting your top watches for next week. Here we go.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. All my blessings, all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beater turn into a Bentley. See I'm stunned, so I'm all I'm thinking, please don't tell me.
Let's start with our two bigger upsets, both coming in the Big 12, starting with number 6, Oklahoma, losing to Kansas State 41-34. Now, Kansas State has won 3 of the past 4 games in this contentious series, so think of all the success the Oklahoma Sooners have had recently. Now think, whoa, Kansas State is basically accountable for almost half of Oklahoma's losses the past few years. Now, the Wildcats have looked pretty good against South Dakota and Missouri wins, but couldn't do anything offensively against Tulane in a 17-10 loss last week. Adrian Martinez, the Nebraska transfer at quarterback, had 304 yards passing and 1 passing touchdown through the first 3 games combined. He had 234 yards passing and a touchdown against Oklahoma. He had 150 yards rushing and 2 rushing touchdowns through the first 3 games combined, and had 148 yards rushing and 4 rushing touchdowns against Oklahoma altogether. That's 372 yards of offense and 5 total touchdowns, almost doubling his total offensive output for the season. Now, Deuce Vaughn still ran for 116 yards, the trusty running back there for the Wildcats. These teams did combine for 54 first downs, so the ball was always moving. And Oklahoma actually had more yardage, but really trailed the entire game. Dylan Gabriel still had 390 yards of total offense and 4 touchdowns. He has yet to throw a pick this season. Eric Gray at running back had 114 yards at 7.1 yards per clip. 11 penalties certainly hurt the Sooners. But it was just a weird offensive explosion from Kansas State, which may have been looking ahead last week, and it was just good execution by Kansas State down the stretch that was the difference here for the Wildcats against the Oklahoma Sooners, who looked pretty solid up until this point. Now, the other game was Texas losing in overtime 37-34 at Texas Tech. Bijan Robinson fumbled the ball on Texas's overtime possession to open that series up. So all Texas Tech had to do was kick a field goal to win the ball game. They're a little lucky that they didn't kind of screw that up. They continued to run plays as they got closer and closer to the goal line rather than just kick a field goal or even kick a field goal on third down to win it, so that if things didn't go right on the attempt, they could just fall on the ball and it would be 4th down and they'd have another shot at it. Lots of things to do to kind of secure the kick and make sure that you can put it in when that's all you have to do. And they just continue to run plays, risk a fumble. The quarterback had it at one point and was going for the end zone and got popped pretty good. So lots of opportunities to lose the ball or get it stripped or really kind of screw that game up. And Texas Tech managed to not do that and did indeed kick the game-winning field goal. Donovan Smith for the Red Raiders was 38 for 56 for 331 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 42 yards and another TD. Texas Tech has had a solid run defense. They did give up 101 yards and 2 touchdowns to Bijan Robinson, possibly the best running back in the country. Of course, you hear that all the time with there being about 60 great college running backs, but he may indeed be the very best. Hudson Card at quarterback was 20 for 30 for 277 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Quentin Ewers was questionable heading into this game. Again, when he was injured against Alabama, it was thought that he could be out 4 to 6 weeks. And he may be back this upcoming week, which is about a 3-week timeline. That should be a nice bump for the offense for Texas. Hudson Card just seems really limited, and he's lost the starting quarterback battle multiple times over the past couple of years for Texas, and I think that's really indicative of his skill level. Now, Texas was outscored 20-3 after taking a 2-score lead in the third quarter. It was a lot of short throws by Texas Tech and Smith to kind of make it down the field. He only averaged 5 point something yards per pass. It was less than 6 yards. Now, he's had 5 picks the past couple of games. He did not look reliable. He was not the starter coming into the year. They've had injuries, but they did manage to get it done here, and he's looking a lot better. He certainly has a good arm, some strength there. Texas Tech was 6 for 8 on 4th down, so they managed to keep drives going, and they ran over 100 plays on offense and managed to knock off Texas. Big win for the Red Raiders as the Big 12 continues to stay strong throughout. So let's hit on a couple of the top 25 matchups that we had in the SEC. Tennessee beat Florida 38-33. Anthony Richardson threw his first touchdown passes, 2 of them actually. He was 22 for 44 for 453 yards. I believe that should be a career high. He also ran for 2 touchdowns, a really good offensive performance, and they lost. So it's very unfortunate there for Florida fans. Hendon Hooker was 22 for 28, finished with 461 total yards because he put some leg work in per se, and 3 total touchdowns. He's getting Heisman buzz now, as I suppose he should, but C.J. Stroud, who we'll get to in a minute, was very efficient as well. The Vols had 227 yards on the ground total as well. Combined, these teams managed almost 1,200 yards of offense. Florida was 5 for 6 on 4th down, trying to keep pace with the Volunteers, who really had control of this game towards the end. As they were trying to run the clock out late, it turned into a flag fest as they were trying to pick up 4th downs. First downs, I should say. They eventually kicked the ball back to the Gators late, and they were able to drive back down the field and score a late touchdown. And they actually managed to recover an onside kick and had a shot at a Hail Mary at the end of the game. Anthony Richardson was nowhere near the touchdown, so it was really not a threat to the Vols win here. And I believe that's only their second win in 18 tries the past 18 years against the Florida Gators for the Tennessee Volunteers, who might be the 3rd best team right now in the SEC behind Alabama and Georgia. Now, Arkansas lost to Texas A&M in Jerry World there in Dallas at a neutral site game, 21-23. Razorbacks had an opportunity to win this game with a field goal, but it bounced off the top of the upright, and it still could have counted if it came down between the goalposts, but it landed back in the end zone. It bounced forward. So the Aggies held on to a win. This was a weird game. There was a crazy touchdown run by the defensive side of the Aggies. KJ Jefferson was diving in for a Arkansas touchdown and just lost the ball. So an Aggie defender grabbed it, ran it back to about the 20-yard line, and he was about to be tackled. So he turned around and just handed it off to another defender behind him, Damani Richardson, who then ran it the rest of the way for a touchdown. I believe it was credited as a 98-yard return, but it was basically a 99-yard, all the way from one end zone to the other. And that just completely turned the game around. It was the only turnover of the game. Arkansas actually had more yards statistically and probably the better defensive performance, more sacks, more tackles for loss. KJ Jefferson finished with 105 yards on the ground, 171 passing on only 19 attempts, but 3 total touchdowns. You see, again, is pretty good running that offense, even against a good defensive front for the Aggies. Now, Max Johnson took over that starting job last week against Miami. This week, he was 11 for 21 for 151 yards and a touchdown. And A-Chain, the running back for Texas A&M, who's been the offense for that squad, had 159 yards and a touchdown. He was about 50% of the Aggies. He's over 50% of the Aggies' offensive production by my count. But these are the kind of games that they're going to have to win. They need the ball to kind of bounce their way, especially in this particular case, in order to continue to roll up wins. I guess a crazy defensive touchdown and a missed field goal by Arkansas, who really could have continued to drive down at the end of the game to score a touchdown and kind of played it safe and conservative and set up a game-winning field goal, which are not gimmies in the college football game. So it was a little confusing where they did that. But again, slow, sluggish game. Arkansas was up early, 14-0, I believe, and lose 23-21 on a defensive touchdown for Texas A&M and a missed field goal that made the difference in the game here. And Texas A&M still can't play any real offense. Speaking of which, let's talk about that Miami team that Texas A&M beat last week in my little blowout section here. The Hurricanes went home to Hard Rock Stadium, welcomed in the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders, paid them $1.5 million to come hang out, and proceeded to get crushed 45-31. If you're a Miami fan last week, you were upset that your dark horse playoff shot was on life support after the Texas A&M loss, and now you're crying in the shower with a bottle of wine with your season on life support. You're 2-2 with no quality wins and one of the most embarrassing losses at home so far this season. Middle Tennessee's schedule so far has consisted of beating Colorado State 34-19 and Tennessee State at a much lower level as well. They're not a very good football team. They lost to James Madison, who's looking pretty solid, 44-7. But this is just not a great team. Chase Cunningham threw for 408 yards and 3 touchdowns, the quarterback there. While on the other hand, Tyler Van Dyke from Miami was 16 for 32 for 138 yards and a touchdown and 2 picks before he was benched. The Hurricanes only had 60 yards on the ground. The offensive line gave up 4 sacks. And again, the defense, 45 points. It was a horrific performance on every single level. I'm not sure what Miami is anymore. They don't have explosive plays on offense. They gave up 3 touchdowns of over 60 yards. 3 touchdowns of over 60 yards, not drives, 60 touchdowns of over 60 yards to Middle Tennessee. Just one of the most embarrassing things that we've seen in a good long while. Now, Wisconsin-Ohio State, a big night game, right? No, not exactly. The Buckeyes roll 52-21. Wisconsin scores a couple touchdowns late to kind of, not look like such a disgrace. Ohio State wore their all blacks and looked pretty good. They led 31-7 at the half. Jackson Smith-Njigba and both starting quarters were out for the Buckeyes. Yeah, both starting quarters. C.J. Stroud threw for 5 touchdowns, and I could read off all the skill position guys, but it was basically stat padding. Henderson and Williams at the running back position each had 100-plus yards rushing. Williams and Egbuka had 2 touchdowns each. On the other side, Brandon Allen for Wisconsin still had 165 yards and a touchdown at over 7 yards per carry. It's just unfortunate that his talent is kind of being lost on this Wisconsin team that's now 2-2. Graham Mertz was 11 for 20 for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns and a pick, as he still struggles against better competition. Notre Dame bounces back against North Carolina. The Irish had 55 points in 3 games combined coming in. They scored 45 on North Carolina and 45-32 torching of the horrible Tar Heel defense after the Heels had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. They took a bye week. Drew Pine had 3 touchdowns, 289 yards. Drake May on the other side for the Heels had 301 yards, 5 touchdowns. He was also the leading rusher for the team with 37 yards. That's not great. But what we learned was basically the Heels defense is going to give up a whole lot of points, and Drake May is going to try to play catch up. This is not good for Mac Brown or that entire staff. This was thought to be a team that could push for 8-9 wins, possibly compete for that division of the ACC, but that defense is laughably horrific, even against a Notre Dame team that's really struggling on the offensive side of the ball. Now let's talk about close calls that we had. There were several of them on Saturday. So let's talk about Michigan and Maryland. Michigan won 34-27, and I gotta tell you, I was not impressed with Michigan at all. Joe Klatt made a point of noting that the 2 offensive coordinator system seems to be causing disruptions for Michigan in play calling. Maryland's defense looked really good, but it also looked like Michigan was really struggling to problem solve, how to get through the zone defense on the back end and how to open the coverage up over the top. J.J. McCarthy was taking a lot of short passes, so he ended up with a great stat line, but he seemed to struggle with decision making sometimes holding the ball too long. His legs do look like a great threat, so I think it was great to go with him over McNamara in this particular case, but you have to wonder if McNamara might have been able to make a few decisions, a few throws that would open things up. Now, Michigan was open turnover on the opening kickoff when the ball bounced off a Maryland returner's helmet, and 2 plays for Michigan to score the first touchdown of the game, just like that. Later on in the second quarter, there was an interception on a horrible pass by Tulia Tegaloa, and it should have stayed Maryland's ball. And the referees did not look at it. It was noted by Klatt on the broadcast that it clearly looked like the ball clearly hit the ground and should not have been Michigan's ball. So that ended a red zone drive for the Maryland Terrapins as well. And it was just a couple of tough calls, lots of drop passes by Maryland, and just some questionable plays by Michigan. They missed a field goal at one point and just didn't always look good. They managed to score a touchdown to take a 17-14 lead before half, going for it on 4th and 1 on Maryland's side of the field, and Corum was able to break it outside for a touchdown. So it was just a great play there and just a blown defensive decision by Maryland. So a couple plays that really went Michigan's way, and they did open up a double-digit lead into the fourth quarter and held off Maryland late. But just a really, Maryland could have won this game. Maryland could have won this game walking away, but a lot of things happened to break Michigan's way. I think Maryland's a good football team. I don't think Michigan was that prepared, and I think JJ's going to have a lot of troubles coming up with Iowa this week. And so far, I don't think Michigan's going to measure up with Ohio State at all. I think this was a great wake-up call for the Wolverines, but I don't think if you really watch this game from beginning to end, you could be very impressed with the Wolverines at all. So let's continue the trend of crushing winners here. Oregon survived Washington State 44-41. The Ducks outscored Washington State 29-14 in the fourth quarter to win this. Now the Cougars were holding onto the ball in a 5-point lead with less than 4 minutes remaining and did a horrible job not moving the ball. They stopped the clock, so they didn't force Oregon to use any timeouts. They didn't convert a third down. They didn't force Oregon to use any timeouts. They didn't score, and they ended up punting the ball away. So horrible possession as they were running time down, trying to just hold on to a lead there. And then Oregon was able to march down the field and scored a touchdown and took the lead with 1:21 remaining. Cameron Ward and the Cougars got the ball back to attempt their own game-changing score to possibly win the game, and the ball was promptly tipped up in the air by the defensive end. It wasn't even tipped. He snatched it out of the air on a quick pass to the flats. Cameron Ward didn't see him, and it was returned to the house for a touchdown, and Oregon ended up winning it. Washington State did score a late one in that one as well to make the score more respectable, but Oregon all of a sudden was up 10 points within about 2 minutes there after being down 5. It was just that quick of a flip. Now the Ducks do finish with 624 yards of offense, 428 yards from Bo Nix, who had 3 touchdowns as well, career high in passing yards. But he was so bad at times. He had a horrible pick 6 when they were driving in the red zone. Altogether, the Ducks had 7 red zone possessions and only 3 scores. That's horrific. That is horrific. And his stat line finished excellent, but the few plays he doesn't make, with its incompletions and the few picks, are game-changing, and that's why they lose games. Just horrific. Now, Cameron Ward for the Washington State Cougars was 375, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. He's really the whole offense for them, and the defense doesn't put up flashy numbers, didn't put up a whole lot of sacks in this game, a whole lot of tackles for loss, that kind of thing. So you would have looked at the box score, had the last maybe score to not come in for Oregon, had Washington State managed to win this, and said, it really looks like Washington State might have been the lesser team here. But realistically, it's poor decisions by Oregon. And Washington State, I think, has a real defense there. I think they can do some things, but Oregon has some real problems. They have some real decision-making issues, and they're not going to win big games this year unless they can start to clean this up. There's always room for progression for them, just like Michigan. But man, they're lucky to win this game. They really shouldn't have won this game, but very fortunate for the Ducks to hold on there. Now, Ole Miss beat Tulsa 35-27. They scored 28 points in the second quarter, 0 points in the second half and had to hang on to win the game over Tulsa. The rushing attack had over 300 yards for the second game in a row. Jackson Dart was 13 for 24 for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns, but there's no quarterback play here. The offense just died, completely died in the second half after Tulsa made some adjustments, and they could do nothing, and they had to hold on to win the game. Just ridiculous. But they're still undefeated. The Ole Miss Rebels are still undefeated. But it's a very different team from last year with no real threat at quarterback. How about the Kentucky Wildcats? One of the few positions they have bolted down is quarterback, with Will Levis, who hasn't always been proficient, going 18 for 26, 303 yards, and 4 touchdowns against Northern Illinois, in a 31-23 battle for survival, as the offensive line gives up 5 sacks. They give up 23 points to a team that they really should have shut out. The defense has been that proficient, but it really wasn't as great this past Saturday. They haven't been scoring a lot of points. 31's right about on par. And he really had to scramble and make things happen in order to win this football game. Northern Illinois is actually starting a backup true freshman quarterback because their starter from last year, the former Michigan State transfer, Rocky Lombardi, was hurt. So they've been playing Ethan Hampton. And he wasn't great, 13 for 25, 196 and a touchdown. But Northern Illinois, who is now 1-3, had a shot at the Wildcats on their home turf. That is not a good look. So let's move on to a few more of the combative games. Baylor headed to Iowa State. They won there 31-24. I don't have much to say here. It was a well-fought game. Shappen was 19 for 26 for 238 yards and 3 touchdowns. Deckers has looked good at quarterback for the Cyclones. He was 23 for 36 for 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Neither team could really run the ball well. ISU did have more penalties, turnovers, and fewer yards per play, so that makes sense, certainly. Really just a good back-and-forth game. But Baylor managed to come out a touchdown ahead of Iowa State. Wyoming gave BYU a battle, but the Cougars did win 38-24 by 2 touchdowns there. Cougars have had injury issues. They had a massive edge in every statistical category: yards, third down conversion rate, yards per play. Cowboys could run the ball early, but the Cougars locked it down later in the game. Jalen Hall was 26 for 32 for 337 yards and 4 touchdowns for the Cougs. Keenan Hill had 5 catches for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. Wyoming has looked bad at times. They've looked pretty competitive at times. Not sure what you're getting with this group whenever they hit the field here. And the Mountain West is now wide open, sort of wide open. We've got a few teams kind of up in the air for what seemed like a very competitive conference. And not sure that they're quite in the mix, but I'm not sure that they're too far out either. USC scores a late touchdown over Oregon State to win 17-14. The Trojans were real close to losing this. Caleb Williams was 16 for 36 for 180 yards and that solo touchdown to Jordan Addison. Travis Dye had 133 yards and a touchdown there. Chance Nolan for the Beavers had 167 yards and 4 interceptions. The only turnovers of the game. USC now leads the country in turnover margin. How about that? Not a sustainable statistic, certainly, but an impressive one, as the defense has not been great. But forcing the ball to turnover certainly helps. Both teams averaged less than 6 yards per pass. To show you what a snail's pace this game rolled at. I come away still thinking both teams are pretty impressive. USC still found a way to win with the offensive ground game and behind the defense that forced those turnovers. They'll continue to be an interesting project to see moving forward, but it was a tough road game. The Beavers held down that powerful offense that was averaging over 40 points per game and still could have won the game even with a -4 turnover margin, what will hopefully be the worst game that Nolan ever plays. I don't expect him to play much worse than that, so I come out more impressed than anything else out of both of those teams. Clemson-Wake was the other big game on the docket. 51-42 in double overtime. DJ and Hartman combined for 710 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, no picks. Clemson scored first in double overtime, and Wake made a questionable choice to throw the ball all the way in the end zone on a 4th and 6th on the 21-yard line. Didn't need to pitch it all the way down there. Not a terrible throw, but the defense was sitting on it, easily batted down. Clemson's defensive front, that was the strength of this team, had only 3 sacks and 2 quarterback hurries. They also had an eye-popping 10 penalties for 120 yards, the Tigers did. It's not surprising they could move the ball on Wake. It was one of DJ's better performances, throwing for 371 yards, and they were 16 for 23 on 3rd down, but the defense not dominating, and the penalties were quite shocking. There are now 4 undefeated 4-0 teams in the ACC, all in the Atlantic Division. Florida State, Syracuse, and NC State will visit the Clemson Tigers this upcoming weekend. How about that? So the top 5 of the AP poll didn't change. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, and Clemson. Number 6 is USC, who moved up a slot, then Kentucky, who moved up a slot, then Tennessee, who moved up 3 slots. Oklahoma State is at 9. They didn't move. They didn't play this week. Number 10 is NC State, who moved up 2. Penn State up 3. Utah up 1. Oregon up 2. Ole Miss up 2. Washington up 3. Baylor up 1. Texas A&M up 6. Oklahoma at 18, who's moved down 12. BYU didn't move. Arkansas was down 10. Minnesota's in for the first time. They were not ranked last week. Wake Forest is down 1. Florida State in for the first time. Pittsburgh, who didn't move, and Kansas State is in for the first time as well. Kansas received votes, so they're effectively 26th. They received 125 votes, followed by Cincinnati, Florida, Washington State, Syracuse, Oregon State, Texas Tech, North Carolina's in there as well for some reason. So is LSU, James Madison. I don't know why Tulane's in there. They lost this week, and they didn't receive votes last week, I don't believe, when they beat Kansas State. UCLA and TC are in there as well. Florida, Texas, and Miami all fell out of the rankings. And Texas did not receive any votes then to make it into the poll. Very, very weird. Very weird, people. So I haven't done this in a couple of weeks, but I'm going to slap together my top 25 right now, my top 25 poll. Not based on what these teams are going to do in the future, because I don't necessarily think these are the top 25 teams moving forward, but as of right now, what they've proved on the field in 4 or sometimes 3 games, these are my top 25. I have Ohio State number 1, I have Georgia number 2, I have Alabama number 3. Now, we can discuss Georgia and Ohio State. Georgia gave up points to Kent State, who they're probably just messing with this past week, and of course blew the doors off Oregon. Ohio State blew the doors off of Wisconsin and struggled a bit against Notre Dame, but put them away at the end of that ball game there. And right now, Notre Dame looks like a better team than Kent State. So I'm putting Ohio State in that impressive offensive ahead of Georgia right now, then Alabama, but I think tier-wise, they're all kind of grouped together there. I have USC 4, and I have Tennessee 5 right now. 6, I have Clemson. 7, I have Washington, who's criminally underrated right now with the way that they're scrapping through opponents, blowing them out. Then I have Penn State, Florida State, and Michigan to round out my top 10. Again, Michigan is undefeated, and they've beat one, I think, quality opponent at this point. 1. Florida State has road wins over Louisville and LSU and is blown out 2 inferior football teams. So I think that schedule-wise and what they've shown so far, despite their flaws as well, they have to be ranked higher up there. I have Kansas at 11, NC State at 12, and Kentucky at 13. I've expressed my disgust with Kentucky. Maybe NC State's coming around a bit, and Kansas has looked excellent so far. So that's my top 13. They're all undefeated teams. Starting with 14 in the next few slots here, I have teams with a good win, and the loss isn't as bad either. It's to a good team. So I have Oregon, BYU, Texas Tech, Texas A&M, and Washington State here. And then I have Oregon State at the 19th spot here, I believe. They lost to that USC team, close. They beat Fresno State and Boise State and they look pretty good. So I'm counting that as a good win somewhere in there and a close loss to a good team as well. So a not bad loss, I guess I would say. My 20, 21, and 22 slots are Minnesota, Ole Miss, and Syracuse. They all seem like decent teams, but don't have a big win, I would say, amongst any of their victories at this point, really. Maybe Louisville for Syracuse, that was at their place. But currently that's where I have those teams. So to fill out the rest of my top 25, here are the rest of my options and their flaws, because I'm trying to fill those last 2 slots, let's say. Staying with the exercise here. I have 4 or 5 undefeated teams still in the country that aren't on my list. TCU has only played 3 games. Not a strong schedule, but they beat SMU, who's one of the better wins. They did win that by 7 points. Oklahoma State, who's only played 3 games as well. 0 big wins there, no big teams. UCLA has won 4 games, no big wins, and nearly lost to South Alabama. They needed a field goal to pull that one out. James Madison has only played 3 games, not a strong schedule, and Coastal Carolina, not a strong schedule either. Those are the last 2 non-Power 5 teams undefeated, Coastal Carolina and James Madison. I also have the 1-loss teams here, the candidates. Arkansas lost to Texas A&M, in a game you could argue they should have won. They beat Cincinnati. They did have a close game with Missouri State for a while there. Baylor lost at BYU close. You could argue they could have won that game. They did win at Iowa State. Utah beat San Diego State and Arizona State, teams that aren't looking so hot right now. Neither one is looking very good. They did lose at Florida close. And Florida isn't looking so hot right now either. Wake Forest survived Liberty and nearly beat Clemson in double overtime. So what do you do with that seesaw? Oklahoma, no big wins, unless you count housing Nebraska to the point that Scott Frost was fired. Pittsburgh didn't look good against Western Michigan or Rhode Island. They've had a lot of injuries. They did have a good win against West Virginia at this point, I think, and the loss to Tennessee wasn't bad, but that was my other choice as well. So this is what I came to. For my last couple slots here, I went with TCU. Despite their only 3 games, they did have one of the better wins in there in SMU, so they are in my number 23 spot. My number 24 spot is going to go to Arkansas. You could argue should have won that game against Texas A&M and has a good win against Cincinnati there. Yes, looked okay so far, I think. And Baylor, who probably should have beat BYU on the road. They have the big win over Iowa State, so that's going to round it out for me. So I have Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Utah, Pittsburgh, Wake Forest currently out of my top 25 as far as what they've shown so far on the field, who they've beaten, schedule, that kind of thing. Of course, I think Oklahoma State's actually quite good, but we don't know. We literally don't know. They let Central Michigan creep back into their game in their opener, and they haven't played anyone since, and they took the past week off. Utah looked like they had a challenging schedule for a while there. San Diego State, Arizona State, Florida, and now I think all those teams are in trouble. Pittsburgh, injuries, we'll see what happens there. Wake Forest is going to have problems on defense all year long. And Oklahoma, it's going to be a competitive Big 12. So we'll see. But so far, based on schedules, my top 25 again, I have Ohio State number 1. I have Georgia number 2, followed by Alabama, USC, and Tennessee in my top 5. Clemson, Washington, Penn State, Florida State, Michigan round out my top 10. Then Kansas, NC State, Kentucky, Oregon, BYU, Texas Tech, Texas A&M, Washington State, Oregon State, Minnesota, Ole Miss, Syracuse, TCU, Arkansas, and Baylor at this time, heading into week number 5. So this week we do have Thursday games, Friday games, a nice healthy slate there, and 5 top 25 matchups on the Saturday slate, more than any other this far. I think we topped out at 3 so far in a couple weeks earlier this year. So a nice lineup, but prayers out to anyone affected by Hurricane Ivan, and that will affect a number of games in the South, including possible cancellations reschedules, and we'll have a number of weather problems as well. Starting with the Thursday night slate, South Carolina State at 1-2 will be heading to South Carolina. They're 2-2. That'll be, I think, on the SEC network. That was originally a noon Saturday game. So the South Carolina Gamecocks, who blew out Charlotte last week 56-20, will have an opportunity for another kind of cupcake win here, if you will. So that is at, let me see here. That is now at 7 o'clock on the SEC network, yes, this Thursday. That's a 40-point line right now. Of note, on 8 o'clock on Thursday, as originally scheduled, number 19 BYU is 3-1. They are hosting Utah State, who is 1-3, having a rough season. The Cougars trying not to be upset after fighting off Wyoming, who has been quite feisty last week. So they'll have an opportunity to fight the ailing Aggies, who've really been struggling this season. This is a 24.5-point line right now, but this is your ESPN Thursday night staple right here. So I expect BYU to kind of rebound. Jalen Hall, of course, a quarterback here. Not too exciting on Thursday, but those are your couple of games. Friday, September 30th, we have a nice healthy slate at this point. It's currently 5 games that will probably not be affected by the storm. Starting with Houston, who's 2-2. They'll be hosting Tulane, who's 3-1 on ESPN. Tulane lost its first game of the season to Southern Miss, 27-24, giving the Golden Eagles their first win of the season. Now, Houston is the most penalized team nationally and has really been in a blender here. The schedule so far: at UTSA, at Texas Tech, home against Rice and Kansas. 4 winnable games in the preseason, but all 4 teams have been very solid, including this Rice team that they beat 34-27. That was no easy task. No part of this team has looked like the 10-11 potential win season in the preseason. And currently the line is Houston by about 2.5. But Tulane could be a little sneaky here. I still think the Cougars are the better football team, but this could really go either way at this point. It'll be interesting to see what they do heading into American Conference play, but that is the opener for both of these teams. 7:30, CBS Sports Network. Middle Tennessee at 3-1 will be hosting UTSA at 2-2. The Roadrunner offense is the strength here. 3 of their receivers rank in the top 15 nationally in receiving yards. 3 receivers in the top 15 for most receiving yards in the country. Giving up a lot of points on defense, but they've played some solid teams here. They did give up 24, unfortunately, against Texas Southern, FBS level team. That was the real outlier there. But the line right now is UTSA minus 5.5 against Middle Tennessee after complete housing of Miami on the road. It should be another shootout here, but the line's slowly shrinking here, 4.5 now. But this should be a fun game, as Middle Tennessee is a pretty competent team as well, so this is a good Conference USA battle early on. It might be one of the better non-Power 5 matchups of the week. At 8 o'clock, FS1. This one is a little bit more dreadful, unfortunately. Boise State is hosting San Diego State. Both teams are 2-2, and this is going to be rather gross. The over-under sits at 39 points. That's at least 15 points lower than anything else I've talked about so far. Boise State's the favorite by 6. But this is going to be disgusting. Boise State just fired their offensive coordinator. Their quarterback, Hank Beheim, has just entered Borham. Doesn't matter, because he's in the transfer portal now. After getting benched in game 1 and probably getting benched moving forward. I imagine that's why he entered the transfer portal, for a more mobile quarterback in green behind him. So that'll be a more exciting element to the offense. I think Green looks solid in the time that he's played running down the field, although he's a little bit questionable as a thrower at times. Think about him as a poor man's Anthony Richardson for the Florida Gators at this point. But both teams are struggling on offense right now. Boise State lost to UTEP 27-10 in a game they shouldn't have lost last week. San Diego State slipped by Toledo 17-13. Now, the Aztecs are only converting 21% of their third downs, which is 129th nationally. Boise State's defense is only allowing 26% of third downs to be converted. So this could be a long day for the Aztecs. Now, right now, the Mountain West is confusing, with Air Force and UNLV holding the best overall records of 3-1 heading into conference play. Neither of them really looked like top teams coming into the season, even though Air Force has a really good roster there. But it seems like someone else should kind of be able to step up into the mix with the injuries at Fresno State, but I'm not quite sure who that is at this exact moment. UCLA hosting number 15 Washington, and a battle of 4-0 teams at 10:30 on ESPN will be the first game that has real national impact. Now, Washington's favored by 2.5 points on the road right now, and I think that they're going to win solidly. UCLA has tightened up on defense the past week against Colorado, 45-17, holding them to 1.5 yards per carry and 6 yards per throw. But Colorado is pretty horrific. That's actually the most points that Colorado scored in a single game all season, as Luke McCown's son, Owen McCown, a true freshman, threw for 238 yards and took over there for the Buffs in a very, very bad season. I would be very concerned about Washington's offense that's put up 45, 52, 39, and 40 points against Stanford this past week in a 40-22 win. The Huskies don't commit a lot of penalties or turnovers. Michael Penix has not been sacked yet this season. He leads the nation in passing yards. The defense has been pretty good. Now, Thomas Robinson on the other side for the Bruins is 5th in passing percentage, but the competition hasn't been great. This will be the first road game for the Huskies, but I think that they'll really fly up the polls if they're able to win here, and I think that they do. UCLA's defense has been struggling, and there's a lot of talk right now about how this could be a competitive game, and we could start talking about the UCLA Bruins if they put up a good battle here, but I think Washington could really crush here and really start to move up the polls. But regardless of the result, we have a nice Pac-12 matchup here between two teams, one of which will be talked about more nationally after this week, and the game isn't squirreled away on the Pac-12 network, and it will be a focus because it's on a Friday night slate here, where they're the only two Power 5 teams on. Now, the late night at 11 o'clock on the CBS Sports Network will be the UNLV team I talked about just a minute ago. They're 3-1. They're hosting New Mexico at 2-2. UNLV is heavily favored. The line is 14.5 their way. They seem to have a real quarterback in Doug Brumfield, completing almost 70% of his passes. They're averaging 40 points per game, but they did beat Idaho State, North Texas, and they won at Utah State. They lost by 6 points to California. It's not a real great sign. New Mexico isn't very good. They're shut out by LSU, lost to Boise. They beat UTEP in Maine. No faster that a game is very intimidating. If UCLA is going to make a move here on the Mountain West, they have to house New Mexico and move to 4-1 and 2-0 in conference play to lead off the Mountain West slate here. They're tied with Louisiana with a +9 turnover margin, tied for second best in the country behind UCLA's +14 crazy turnover margin that they have right now. So that's helped get them to where they're at right now. At least a couple of those games should be watchable. Washington, UCLA, UTSA, and Middle Tennessee. Tulane, Houston might be as well, and you might get your first look at UNLV if you stay up that late. And so not too bad of a Friday slate there at all. So let's head into the noon slate for Saturday, October 1st. Currently, 21 teams are unbeaten. At least 3 will pick up losses this week because we have 3 battles between unbeaten squads, starting with that Friday night matchup, as I just stated. And again, we may have changes, cancellations, reschedules, weird weather games, wind, rain, delays, lightning, all kinds of stuff because of the hurricane impacting Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, all kinds of stuff. All right, let's slide into what is currently the noon slate for this Saturday, Saturday, October 1st, excuse me. How time flies. 21 teams are currently unbeaten. At least 3 of them will end up with losses by the end of the weekend, and I expect a few more as well. Again, time changes, cancellations, weird weather games are going to be on the docket because of the unfortunate Hurricane Ian heading towards Florida. But let's hit your top watches as currently scheduled right now. First of all, I have TCU at 3-0 hosting Oklahoma at 3-1. The Sooners are currently ranked 18th after the Kansas State loss. They gave up about 300 yards of total offense combined through the first 3 games and then gave up over 500 yards to Kansas State, really throwing some of the defensive metrics out of whack now. Yet, this team really has to figure some things out, but should be tested a little bit here by the Horned Frogs. Now, Marvin Mims is averaging 22.1 yards per catch on 18 receptions, which is pretty crazy. It's 9th nationally, but 2nd in the highest volume of catches among the top 12 guys. So she's just a really big playmaker for the Sooners. Allie Jennings III at Old Dominion is averaging 23.3 yards on 24 catches this season. Now that's bonkers. But Oklahoma, as I was saying, has a big playmaker. The defense just does need to be figured out, but they do have a real quarterback here in a time when some of the transfers have not worked out so far nationally. We see Emory Jones has moved from Florida to Arizona State. That hasn't been so great. Jackson Dart moved from USC to Ole Miss, and he might not even be the starter the whole season. Slavic has moved from USC to Pittsburgh. He can't stay healthy and hasn't looked so spectacular. We had Spencer Rattler move from to South Carolina from Oklahoma. He hasn't looked so hot, and there's just a whole slew of transfers all over the place that have really struggled this season. However, Dylan Gabriel from Central Florida over here to Oklahoma has still looked the part. No interceptions yet this season, and he's up to 11 touchdowns now, almost 67% completion percentage, 9.3 yards per toss. Mims being a good target there, but still need to figure out things defensively. TCU, on the other hand, managed to beat its first real quality opponent last week in SMU by a touchdown after leading 28-7 early and 28-14 at the half. They had more touchdowns than third downs at halftime. They were 2 for 3 on third down and 4 touchdowns. This despite 5 penalties, which is quite a few. Max Duggins, through a game and a half, came in leading the country in completion percentage after he lost the QB battle to Shane Morris, who suffered a leg injury in Game 1, and then he went on to torch SMU 22 for 28 for 278 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's now 3rd in percentage, but number 1 in overall quarterback rating. And SMU really started to get humming in the second half a little bit, and 10 overall penalties from TCU really slowed them down, but they still pulled that game out. Now, both teams have played a quality opponent at this point, and I think this will be a good battle to see where they are moving forward. So this is a true road test, I should say, because Kansas State won at Oklahoma last week, and the Red River rivalry, say that 5 times fast, is next week between between Oklahoma and Texas. So losing to TCU on the road here would not be good for the Sooners, but TCU, the sneaky little Horned Frogs, could sneak up and peck them. So I expect to see probably some points in this game. Again, this is not your grandfather's TCU team. They're going to put up some points. 68.5 is the over-under. Oklahoma 6.5 on the road is the favorite right now. This should be a very exciting game in the noon slot. Number 4, Michigan is 4-0, and they're heading to Iowa, where the Hawkeyes are 3-1. That is on Fox. J.J. McCarthy does lead the country in completion percentage at over 80%. Spencer Petras is 122nd at 51.1%. So that's the disparage there. J.J. has not played a full set of games at this point, as there was a quarterback battle there with McNamara, and the competition has not been stiff. Iowa's played a little bit more difficult schedule that does not make up for how horrific the offense has been. Now, Iowa did force 3 turnovers and had 2 defensive touchdowns against Rutgers last week in a 27-10 win, the Scarlet Knights' first loss of the season. Cooper DeJean has 3 picks on the year and is a threat back in that secondary. I don't think JJ was quite as good as advertised against Maryland last week and was a bit tentative at times, and he can't do that against Iowa. They will make you pay. But they can lean on Blake Corum, who has 9 touchdowns, which is first in the country. He's 7th in rushing yards at 478 and top 15 in yards per carry at 7.5. So they can certainly lean on that aspect of the offense. And I'm not sure that they will need too many touchdowns to win this game. Again, they scrapped Iowa last year in the Big Ten game. So, as long as the defense is able to buckle down here a little bit and the offense can move the ball some, I think they'll be in okay shape. Although not being able to generate a pass rush is a little bit scary. They were not able to do much against Maryland until the second half. So it's a little bit of a scary game, and there's been some movement on it. Michigan's 11-point favorites and a 42-point over-under, but this seems just a little bit scary. But it'd be nice to see Michigan really bounce back and evolve from Maryland last week and kind of blow out the Hawkeyes. However, if the Hawkeyes are able to keep it close, who are we kidding? Iowa's offense is going to be putrid again this year, and I don't know where they're going to fall in the pecking order of the Big Ten West. But this is going to fall more on a gauge of showing us where Michigan falls than Iowa at this point, probably. Also on the noon slate, 2 more undefeateds. Number 14 Ole Miss will be hosting number 7 Kentucky on ESPN. And this is a complete toss-up game. Neither one has looked very consistent, and they've both been kind of beating up on inferior opponents at this point. Kentucky did go to the Swamp and beat Florida, so you can certainly chalk that up as a big win on the list, I suppose, but then struggled against Northern Illinois last week. Ole Miss has struggled against Tulsa. They had a little bit of a fight against Troy on their hands in the opener. Neither team has looked real dominant, but Kentucky will be throwing the ball with Will Levis, who's really getting attention now again from NFL. He's got more NFL buzz as of this past week, so we'll see if that continues to generate if they're able to win on Saturday. The offensive line was woeful against Northern Illinois. They should have Chris Rodriguez in for his first game of the season, I believe, this upcoming weekend as well. He did not play at all the first few games after his suspension, and he should be a nice boost to that offense. But it's the defense is supposed to be the strength in Will Levis, and the defense has suffered at times. But it's going to be the quarterback position for Kentucky that helps determine the game. And again, Will Levis has taken 16 sacks this year. That's second in the country. And Ole Miss has back-to-back 300-yard games on offense, and that's how they will look to move the ball again. But this is very much a coin flip between two teams that have really had their warts. But that is the nooner on ESPN, and one of them will push towards, Kentucky will move towards the top 5, and Ole Miss, if they win, will push towards the top 10. So we'll see what happens there. Purdue at 2-2 will be heading on the road to number 21, Minnesota. The Gophers are 4-0. This is the ESPN2 game. Now the Gophers are 41-52 on third downs. Ibrahim, the running back, is second in the country in rushing with 141.8 yards per game, and second in rushing touchdowns with 8. An elite weapon back there. Tanner Morgan is great. He's towards the top of the country in completion percentage. The big question for Purdue is Aiden O'Connell. Is he going to play? It's supposed to be a game time decision. Charlie Jones for Purdue leads the country in receptions by a good amount with 41. He's third in receiving yards with 533, averages 13 yards per catch, and is tied for the most touchdown receptions in the country at 7. So the Boilermakers want to know who is going to step up and be the new star receiver with David Bell moving on to the Cleveland Browns, and now they know. Mr. Charlie Jones. So, can Purdue go on the road and beat Minnesota without Aiden O'Connell? No. Can they win with a banged-up O'Connell? Not so sure about that. If he's feeling pretty good, pretty healthy, by the time this game rolls around on Saturday. Do they have a shot again with that offense? Maybe. But road game, Minnesota's looking very good. Purdue would have to pull a pretty big one out of the hat here to compete in the West. But that's your nooner on ESPN2. Purdue trying to hang on at 2-2 on the road at Minnesota. The next game I have here is number 25, Kansas State at 3-1, hosting Texas Tech at 3-1. This is on the Big 12 Network and ESPN Plus, mostly because one of these teams will be 4-1 coming out. Now, Adrian is getting a lot of love after his big performance against Oklahoma, in which he had 5 total touchdowns and nearly doubled his offensive production, rushing and passing for the season. But he has not been very productive overall here for Kansas. So I'm not sure where the excitement is coming from. But if Adrian Martinez can continue to put up some yardage against a Texas Tech defense, which is still pretty solid, then he should continue to get the appropriate amount of attention. And Deuce Vaughn is still a great running back there for the Wildcats. But if Donovan Smith, on the other hand, for the Texas Tech Red Raiders, the 6'5 sophomore, is able to have another outstanding performance and win here on the road. He had 2 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown as well against Texas. Then he should start to really get some buzz as well in the Big 12 Conference there as maybe one of the better quarterbacks if he's able to have a really efficient performance. But again, a big game because one of these teams is going to be 4-1 coming out on the back end in the very competitive Big 12 Conference, which does not seem to have a really bad team per se on the slate. Now, Kansas State will play at Iowa State, at TCU coming up, so a couple road games. A loss here could kind of send them into a tailspin. And then Texas Tech on the other side will play at Oklahoma State before getting home games against West Virginia and Baylor. So they're going to have a couple rough ones coming up as well, but nothing seems to be a given in the Big 12. So this could be a key matchup for either one to kind of get to a big milestone here. Staying in that noon slate, and I was going to move this to kind of a middle tier game, but Wisconsin at 2-2 will be at home against Illinois, who is 3-1 on the Big 10 Network. Now, Chase Brown for Illinois leads the country with 151 yards per game. He's also a leader in the country in explosive runs of 10-plus yards. The defense only allows a 25% conversion rate on third down and has the second best red zone defense at a 50% stoppage rate with only 6 attempts allowed in the red zone and only 1 touchdown in that spot. Illinois might be a very, very good football team. Wisconsin is pretty much what they were last year. They're running back in true sophomore now, Brandon Allen, who's statistically now not even one of the best in the Big Ten, with Abraham in Minnesota and Chase here being 2 of the top backs in the country, not to mention the fleet that Michigan and Ohio State have. So unfortunately, Brandon Allen is in a tough conference here with a lot of good running backs. He still has almost 500 yards on the season at 6.8 yards a clip and 6 touchdowns, but not a lot of support here. Graham Mertz down to 67% completion percentage now, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks, and the defense, man, I don't know what the defense is doing. It's supposed to be the strength of the team, completely destroyed by what's probably one of the best, might be the best offense in the country in Ohio State, giving up 52 points. But they lost to Washington State a couple weeks back, only gave up 17, but that was enough. Illinois looks like they have a good defense, although they haven't played the stiffest competition right now, but a good defense right now. A competent quarterback in the transfer from Syracuse, Tommy DeVito, who's completing 69% of his passes, one of the best running backs in the country. They were a play away against Indiana from being 4-0, so I think Illinois actually goes on the road and beats Wisconsin, which means the Badgers would be 2-3, but still a very interesting matchup here. So several watchable noon games, particularly on the Big Ten side. Michigan at Iowa, Purdue at Minnesota, Illinois at Wisconsin, although some of those lines, again, are getting a little out of whack with Aiden O'Connell's being questionable on the Minnesota game and the unknown kind of a Michigan at Iowa. But still, Texas Tech at Kansas State as well, and Oklahoma at TCU. So some Big 12 action in there as well. And Kentucky at Ole Miss will be one of the big watches for the SEC side of things. On the smaller scale, just worth noting, Florida at 2-2 will be hosting Eastern Washington at 1-2 on the ESPN Plus network. Air Force at 3-1 will be hosting Navy at 1-2 on CBS. So that'll be, quite frankly, an easy game to click off of. Air Force, again, a very good team. But what they do is no surprise. Good defense. They're going to run the ball. Navy will do the same. Air Force is much better at it. Boston College at 1-3 will be hosting Louisville at 2-2. Louisville trying to climb back up the hill after a rough start. Malik Cunningham trying to run the offense. That's on the ACC network. Louisville really should not lose this football game. And if they do, it would be very, very bad. Boston College's offensive line is horrific. But Phil Juravich there, I believe that's how you pronounce the quarterback's name for Boston College, was supposed to be an NFL prospect, got hurt last year, came back to try and boost his stock, and it's been a horrific season to start for him, and that team's not going to go to a bowl game. And finally, Memphis at 3-1 is hosting Temple at 2-2. That's on ESPNU. I haven't got an opportunity to watch much of either of these teams. Temple was really not expected to win more than 2 games, so it's kind of a surprise they're at 500, even a quarter of the way through the season so far. And Memphis at 3-1 could make some noise running through the American Conference, which actually has several good teams to no one's surprise. It was supposed to be kind of a runaway with Cincinnati and Houston there. But I still like East Carolina. Tulane's been surprisingly good. Central Florida's still in the mix. Maybe Tulsa, SMU, and then this Memphis team. So kind of interesting there. And they do have a good quarterback as well, Seth Hennigan, who's thrown for over 1,000 yards, completing almost 67% of his passes, 8 touchdowns. So looks like a solid group there in the Memphis Tigers. The afternoon slate. And I just tossed in everything from this, the 1:30s, the 2:30s, 3:30s, 4s, all the weird times. If it was after 12 noon, it fell on the afternoon slate. So let's start at 1:30. Texas State at 2-2 will travel to James Madison. They're 3-0. That's on ESPN Plus. James Madison, not only are they undefeated, still one of the better offenses in the country. The Dukes scored 22 unanswered points in the second half against Appalachian State on the road last week to finish 32-38 and come out ahead in that game to keep that unblemished record. Big victory there, which means they open up as 3-score favorites against Texas State, and they hope to continue the winning streak there. Good luck for James Madison in the Sun Belt in their opening season. 2 o'clock, Oregon State at 3-1, heading on the road to number 12 Utah, who is also 3-1. This is on the Lost Pac-12 network for the few of you on the West Coast who get it. Now, tight end Brant Kuth will miss the rest of the season for Utah with a knee injury. He leads the team with 19 receptions. That is not a good sign. Utah loves its ends tight. Top 2 guys, and as far as receptions are tight ends, Dalton Kinnaid is the other guy, 16 receptions for 240 and 4 touchdowns. So we'll expect to see him still at the forefront of the offense. And perhaps Thomas Yasmin, who only has 2 catches on the year this season, will see a little bit more action. 2 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown is a stat line so far after a 72-yard reception. So we'll expect him to see a few more catches. But this will be an excellent game. The Utah Utes have just been quietly winning games since that Florida opener that they lost. They beat Southern Utah, San Diego State, who looks like a bad football team right now, 35-7. They won at Arizona State, 34-13 last week. Again, that team doesn't have a permanent football coach right now. Oregon's mopped up some Mountain West teams early and hung on against USC last week before falling. Now, Chance Nolan shouldn't have nearly as bad a week as he did last with 4 interceptions. This team has looked pretty solid on defense, holding the USC Trojans in check. and they're averaging just under 40 points per game. Utah's averaging 42 points per game. So this is a big game for both of these squads. Utah having a chance to beat another quality opponent here on its home turf. Oregon having the opportunity to go on the road and notch a big win. One of these squads will be 4-1. Pac-12 network again, so a lot of folks won't get to see it. The Cam Rising, 954 yards right now, 66% completion percentage, 10-2 touchdown to interception ratio, only been sacked 3 times. Utah was hoping to win the Pac-12 this year, running away. It's not looking like it's going to happen right now with all the quality teams in the conference, and Utah's favored by 10 at home against the Beavs with the 54.5 over-under, but this could be a much closer game than that, and Oregon could win on the road here. So keep an eye on at least the score if you can't watch the game of that, Utah and Oregon State at 2 o'clock. 3:30, this will be one of the primetime games. Number 20, Arkansas is now 3-1, but they're welcoming in Alabama, who's now 3-0. This is the big CBS game, and Arkansas is going to be expected to kind of hang with Alabama here. Razorbacks' pass defense has been horrible. They have 2 of the top sackers in the country, though. I struggle to see how this team's going to be able to keep up with Alabama, who's had struggles of its own. But the offense for Arkansas, only 17 attempts in the red zone this season. Only 11 have come away in touchdowns. They've had 2 field goals. They had the big missed field goal against Texas A&M last week that cost them the game. A game they could have won had the game just gone differently on a couple coin flip plays, quite frankly. But here they are. And it's man, the red zone offense is bad. The pass defense is bad. And Alabama's offensive line certainly been struggling. The receiving corps has been struggling at times. I believe the running back there, Sims, the transfer, is still one of the leaders in a number of receiving categories, which is pretty bad. But Alabama on the road here has also struggled as well. I still expect the Tide to kind of pull away from this one. They're favored by 17 on the road with a 61 over-under, and there's been some talk about the Razorbacks possibly being an upset. I kind of think they cover the spread personally. Alabama at Arkansas on CBS at 3:30. Staying at 3:30, number 9 Oklahoma State is 3-0. They're heading to number 16 Baylor. The Bears are 3-1. This will be the big Fox game at 3:30, and we got a big ABC one as well. So this is just a wild afternoon slate. But the Baylor Bears coming off a not a tough loss. They got a big win at Iowa State last week, 31-24. They lost to BYU a few weeks back, so that's their lone blemish there. Oklahoma State has beaten nobody. Central Michigan 58-44 in a game that really made you kind of doubt their defense there, but really showed you that Spencer Sanders is going to run a different kind of offense this year. They then beat Arizona State 34-17 that started to spell out the end of Herm Edwards' tenure there in the desert, and beat University of Arkansas Pine Bluff 63-7 before taking a bye week. So they've had 2 weeks to prepare for this rematch of the Big 12 championship game from last year, where Oklahoma State literally came up an inch short with the running back or wide receiver, can't remember the player exactly, diving for the goal line last play of the game and coming up just short in a very sad affair for the Cowboys, but Baylor managed to pull that one out. Now, Baylor, of course, made a official quarterback change and had a transfer out. And so Blake Shapen has been starting here for the group, completing 69% of his passes. He's been under a lot of pressure, though, not completing a lot of passes under pressure. It's been very difficult for him, despite the high completion percentage. And it really kind of showed in a few of the past games here. And we're not sure what we have with the Oklahoma State Cowboys again at all. The defense has looked shaky at times. So I would expect Baylor to be able to put up some points. Currently, they're favored by a couple at home, but Oklahoma State could definitely move on this defense, I would think. Of course, the Cowboys lost their defensive coordinator to Ohio State, but this could be an interesting game, not quite like it was last year. 56.5 over-under at the moment. Again, I'd expect some points from Oklahoma State, and possibly Baylor could move the ball back. I kind of like the Cowboys on the road. I don't have them ranked in my personal top 25 right now, but this would be a game that would put them right in there. The first quality win and a big one on the road. But this is one of the bigger games To me, one of the biggest games to really see and more gauge where these two teams are at. Baylor having already played 2 quality opponents on the road, losing one to Baylor, winning one at Iowa State, and Oklahoma not having played anyone. Again, just a really big game for the Big 12. Oklahoma State might be the best team in the conference right now, with Oklahoma going down last week. So the ABC game is number 23, Florida State, who's 4-0, hosting 3-1 Wake Forest, who's number 22. So that's your slate on the major networks at 3:30. CBS is Arkansas, Alabama. Fox is Baylor, Oklahoma State. And ABC is Florida State, Wake Forest, which is just wild. We got another one on ESPN2 to tackle in a second. So 10 players are averaging 10 yards per pass or more. Number 1 is J.J. McCarthy from Michigan at 11.6 to lead the country. Of course, a little inflated by tearing apart those weaker opponents in the non-conference. Second is Max Duggan. We've discussed several times out of TCU in his limited action. Tanner Morgan out of Minnesota. C.J. Stroud out of OSU. Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee. No surprises there. That's the top 5. Number 7 is Riley Leonard out of Duke, which explains their fast start there, throwing the ball down the field. Number 8 is Grayson McCall out of Coastal Carolina. He's the entire offense for that team. Will Levis for Kentucky is number 9, and Davis Brin for Tulsa, and their surprising start is number 10. So who's number 6 on that list? Well, it's Jordan Davis for Florida State at 10.4 yards per completion. Now, he has more passing attempts than the top 3 guys on the list and has more action than the top 2, and he's actually missed some snaps himself due to being banged up in one of the games, which has always been one of the red flags for him, but he's still number 6 on the list, and in terms of volume, he's only behind C.J. Stroud and Hendon Hooker. So for that volume, to average that many yards is quite impressive. So he pushes the ball down the field, and he will have to against Wake Forest, who, as we know against Clemson and many other opponents dating back to last year, will happily score points and will happily give them up as well. The Florida State, at this point, has one of the more impressive records. Road wins at LSU and Louisville, and they crushed Boston College last week. And they're actually a full touchdown favorite here against Wake Forest, who nearly beat Clemson last week. So that should tell you something. Wake Forest, I'd be devastating to take back-to-back losses here, but this would be a big win if they could grab it. They've got an easier stretch coming up, home against Army, home against Boston College, then they would play Louisville on the road. Florida State themselves, Wake Forest, at NC State, home against Clemson is their next 3. So they have a lot of big names coming up here, but this would be a big win for them going the other way. So just a big game overall here in the ACC. Florida State, Wake Forest, 3:30, ABC. The next one that's considered top shelf for me is unranked Kansas at 4-0. They'll be hosting Iowa State at 3-1 on ESPN2. A lot of talk this week about how Kansas is not ranked. I put them in my top 25 personally. Kansas is converting on 66% of third downs. That is second nationally behind Minnesota's gaudy number of 70+% and just ahead of Ohio State by a touch. Jalen Daniels is the talk of the town. 71% completion percentage, 11 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's one of the better mobile rushing quarterbacks in the country as well. They only beat Duke by a touchdown last week, which was a big game, but now they're underdogs at home to the Iowa State Cyclones, who are coming off a loss to Baylor last week by a touchdown of their own. So if they can hold serve here and beat the Cyclones on their home turf, it continues to solidify the strength of this team. Coming up, they're hosting TCU before heading to Oklahoma, heading to Baylor, and hosting Oklahoma State. This would not be a great time for them to take a loss per se. This is going to be one of the, at this point, easier games on the schedule. Jayhawks are averaging 47 points per game. Cyclones were a little modest last week against Baylor, didn't play their best football. Hunter Deckers is still throwing for over 1,000 yards, completing 71% of his passes, but really couldn't do much against Baylor last week, throwing a couple of picks in there. It'd be nice to see Kansas continuing their role. That's mostly what we're watching it for at this point, but this is a really good football team, and they need to hold serve here against Iowa State if they want to keep on rolling. SMU and Central Florida, I had next in the slot. I just had notification that this was moved to Sunday. So scratch that. But Sunday, October 2nd, because of the hurricane at 1 o'clock, it doesn't have a network assigned yet, but SMU at 2-2 will be heading to Central Florida. The Knights are 3-1. They'll probably be at a neutral site location, I'm thinking now. But that'll be a great American battle as well. SMU, with its great passing offense, challenged TCU last week. Central Florida still has a great football team there, regardless of the personnel or anything like that. But they lost to Louisville by a touchdown earlier in the year. They've since knocked off Florida Atlantic and Georgia Tech. Not incredibly great teams there. But John Rye Plumlee, he's one of the better mobile quarterbacks in the country as well. It's basically him, Jalen from Kansas right now, and Cunningham from Louisville, who are leading in a lot of rushing categories statistically at the quarterback position. He's not a top flight thrower, but he is a great dual threat for that team. So this will be a bigger battle in the American Conference. Again, that was pushed to Sunday. I do still have North Carolina at 3-1, hosting Virginia Tech at 2-2 on the ACC network. North Carolina's defense is atrocious. Drake May is elite at the quarterback position. UNC is favored by 9 at home, and you would never have an idea what the hell is going to happen. Virginia Tech somehow leads, is at the top of the division in the Coastal for the ACC, and that is really a dumpster fire division right now, with the Atlantic being so strong with Clemson, Florida State, Syracuse, NC State, Wake Forest, and just a cluster in the Coastal, you could say. And these two teams will be battling out in that division. Maryland at 3-1 will be hosting Michigan State at 2-2 on FS1, also in that 3:30 hole. And Sparty's going to have a hell of a time. Maryland looked well coached and prepared for the Michigan game. I think that they really should have almost won that football game. There are a lot of plays that could have gone their way. Tugaloa still makes some questionable calls. We still have a lot of passes by the receivers there at Maryland. A lot of things that you kind of expect from, I hate to say this, a middling team at times. But the defense is really stepping up, and the offense still has the ability to do a lot of damage. Maryland's favored by over a touchdown in this game, and we've seen nothing from Michigan State to indicate that they can really do anything at this point. Ohio State, number 3, 4-0, hosting Rutgers, who's 3-1, also 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. Rutgers looked solid until they ran into Iowa last week, and they gave up more points defensively by turning the ball over than to the offense of the Iowa Hawkeyes. So they're going to get ripped by Ohio State. The line on this right now, I'm going to guess, is like 30. It's 40.5 with a 59 over-under. Oh boy. Also 3:30. Number 11 Penn State's 4-0. Nicholas Singleton is averaging 9 yards per carry, the freshman running back, on 42 attempts. That's third nationally. He is a monster. They are hosting Northwestern, who's 1-3. They're still holding on to that one win over Nebraska. So that'll be on ESPN. Penn State knocking the crap out of Northwestern. Also at 3:30, Toledo at 2-2. They'll be hosting Central Michigan at 1-3 on the NFL Network. Yes, the NFL Network. This will be a good game. Central Michigan has been able to push some teams around. I think that offense is quite dangerous. And Toledo, on the other hand, has one of the more fun non-Power 5 quarterbacks to watch, and DeQuinn Finn running the football over there. So I think that'll be a fun, smaller scale MAC game to watch there. I have one more afternoon game that's a big watch here, a big watch. First of all, at 4 o'clock, Coastal Carolina at 4-0 is hosting Georgia Southern at 3-1. That's on ESPN+. Keep an eye on that, as Coastal is one of the only non-Power 5 teams, along with George Mason, that is still undefeated. They hope to stay that way against a feisty Georgia Southern team that took down Nebraska earlier this season. So, what's the other big one? Well, it's Mississippi State, who's 3-1. They're hosting number 17, Texas A&M, who's also 3-1 on the SEC network. Now, Texas A&M has lost their top receiver for the season, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, as we know the offense is struggling mightily, and A-Chain has been the top weapon for that offense altogether. Devin A-Chain, who has 355 yards rushing at 5.5 yards a clip for 3 touchdowns. He's part of the passing attack as well. But Aeneas Smith has 15 catches for 291 yards, 19.4 yards per clip, 2 touchdowns, leads the Aggies in all those categories, and he's out for the season. So how much will that neuter the offense, or is the offense neutering itself without the receiver's assistance? Not really sure at this point. Max Johnson will probably still be at quarterback, I'm assuming. Has not been more impressive than Haynes King, although he's played the more difficult games. And I expect Mississippi State to hold serve here and beat the Aggies. Mississippi State has done a good job so far this season. Will Rogers up there in completion percentage. They beat Bowling Green 45-14 last week. They won at Arizona big. They beat Memphis. They did lose at LSU 31-16 in a game that got away from them in the fourth quarter. But again, Will Rogers, 74% completion percentage, over 1,300 yards, 16 touchdowns to 3 picks. This team is going to be able to put up points, and I think the defense is comparable to the Texas A&M Aggies. 45-point over-under, Mississippi State, -4 right now. And again, 4 o'clock SEC Network, Texas A&M, Mississippi State could be a big move for the Bulldogs, or could be a big win for the Aggies on the road the other way around. That's one of the top watches on the afternoon slate that's full of them. Oregon State, Utah, Alabama, Arkansas, Oregon State, Baylor, Wake Forest, Florida State, and Iowa State, Kansas as well. Evening slate starts at 5 o'clock. Syracuse is 4-0. They're hosting 0-3 Wagner, ESPN Plus. Syracuse shouldn't have any problems moving to 5-0. Washington State is 3-1. California is 3-1. They're heading to Cougar Country. That's on the Pac-12 network. That's squirreled away, unfortunately. California should not be a good football team, but Washington State's only favored by 4 points at home. California has beat Arizona 49-31. Not sure what to make of the Wildcats this year. They've beaten UNLV, who is 3-1, by 6 points. They lost at Notre Dame 24-17. I'm not sure if any of these teams are good. Arizona, UNLV, Notre Dame, California. So I'm not sure what happens when one beats the other or one beats a couple of the other. I have no idea what to do with that information. California has no significant outliers, if any, statistical categories anywhere. Jake Plummer might be an okay quarterback, 975 yards, 61% completion percentage, 8 touchdowns. They seem to have a couple solid receivers, Jeremiah Hunter and Michael Stuyvesant, both averaging over 13 yards per reception. But I'm not sure what to do with the Golden Bears at this point. If they manage to win at Washington State to move to 4-1, then that would be pretty incredible. But the Cougars should have beat Oregon last week. They were real close. They had their foot on the throat, but it should have been more difficult for the Ducks to make that comeback. And they had the big win at Madison, just managing to make plays to win football games. And it's really because of Cameron Ward and what he's been able to do for that football team, even if he's not putting up the most incredible numbers. But he's got over 1,100 yards at 69% completion percentage right now. So will this be an interesting game? I don't really know. Every game, Idaho, Wisconsin, Oregon, has been one possession other than the Colorado State blowout, 38-7. Just not sure what to make of this, but I expect the Cougars to win. Auburn is 3-1. They're hosting LSU, who is 3-1 at 7 o'clock on ESPN, and these teams are not equal. LSU is far from perfect right now, but Jaden Daniels has been able to move the football. Looks pretty good scrambling around, and the Tigers are favored by 9 points on the road right now. They beat New Mexico, and they beat Mississippi State 31-16, their last couple of wins there. Starting to get the wide receivers involved, too, after some skirmishes earlier in the season. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thompson, Janae Jenkins are all involved. Joshua Butte has trailed off a little bit, but they still have involvement from a number of top skill position players there. Jaden Daniels is completing 73% of his passes. Now, Auburn did everything it could to lose to Missouri last week. Missouri had a game-winning field goal lined up in overtime and missed it, and then had a game-winning touchdown in overtime, but the fumbled the ball while outreaching his hand. No one was around him. Dropped the ball into the end zone, and Auburn fell on it to secure a 17-14 win in a atrocious, awful, horrible game. And so Auburn still has its coach, and they're bad. They're bad's the point here. But LSU will be heading to Auburn on ESPN. Tulsa at 2-2 will be hosting 3-1 Cincinnati at 7 o'clock on ESPNU. A much better football game here. And the Bearcats will be looking to move to 4-1 on a tough road game to continue their march in the American Conference. Also, South Florida, 1-3, hosting East Carolina at 2-2 on ESPN+. And Western Kentucky at 3-1, hosting Troy at 2-2 on ESPN+. A number of interesting teams involved here. East Carolina, there's a couple tough losses for them, including the NC State one to open the season. South Florida's been involved in a number of games here. And so the Pirates will be heading on the road there to try and up their record. Troy, always a feisty team on the Sun Belt, heading to that potent offense of Western Kentucky on the road. So a couple of interesting matchups there. Your top games, though, come in the 7:30 slot. Let's start with West Virginia at 2-2, heading to Texas, who's 2-2 at FS1. Now, West Virginia crushed Virginia Tech last Thursday, and Texas lost on the road at Texas Tech, where the defense was on the field for over 100 plays just last Saturday. So West Virginia's well rested, even though they're on the road here. And Texas has played, extra innings, essentially, last week. So be on the lookout for an upset here. It's possible that West Virginia, after an 0-2 record, could be moving to winning in the W column here, and Texas could be 2-3 after 5 games, and we all know the kind of attention that gets, despite being in a close game with Alabama not too long ago. Now, Quinn Ewers was on the sideline last week. It was tentative that he'd be in the game, and he was not. He might be back for this one. He is a difference maker. Hudson Card is no Quentin Ewers. So quarterback change would be very welcome. And this defense for Texas, which is one of the worst in the country last year, we're still seeing some flaws there, certainly, although it's a much improved group. Bijan Robinson is still great there. Xavier Worthy is still a great receiver. There's still all kinds of pieces here. They need a difference maker at quarterback to help cover up some of that flaws. The defense doesn't have to be a lockdown unit as a whole. And Quentin Ewers, man, that's going to be the difference. JT Daniels still settling things down in West Virginia. So this should be a really good battle. Ewers is going to be a key piece of that. Now, my game of the week, number 5 Clemson hosting number 10 NC State on ABC. If you've been listening, you know I've been on the Wolfpack since the preseason. They're my number 7 team. Clemson was 10 or 11. I thought the ACC would get left out of the playoffs because teams would kind of cannibalize each other and we'd have everyone with probably 2 losses. But I thought NC State would be the best, well-rounded team. They still have a weapon here at quarterback in Devin Leary, despite the fact that he hasn't looked as able recently. He hasn't been throwing as well as you'd expect, and the offense has been a little sputtery. The defense is still excellent, and I just thought that they'd come along further than Clemson's offense, and that the defenses would be comparable. And if they won this big game on the road at Clemson, they'd be able to head to the ACC championship game, wrap things up there, and just win the whole ACC conference. Clemson, to its credit, put up a whole lot of points on Wake Forest last week. DJ Ungale had a career high in touchdowns and yardage. But I don't have a whole lot of confidence that they'll be able to do the same to NC State's defense. So even though there's certainly some blemishes on what the Wolfpack is able to put together, I still think that they are going to be able to go into Death Valley and have an opportunity to win this football game. Now, they struggled a little bit with Texas Tech, but pulled that out 27-14 in a defensive battle. They survived that East Carolina game early in the season, obviously. They blew out Connecticut and Charleston Southern, but they'll have 2 weeks here to prepare for this football game. And Clemson coming off the double overtime game on the road. They'll be at home, but I think NC State has a real opportunity to come in here and beat the Clemson Tigers in their home place. So this is going to be a big statement in the ACC, which is looking a little waffly right now with who's on top. Because right now it looks like Clemson, despite its flaws, just needs to show up to work to win the conference right now with the way it's looking. And NC State can really throw a wrench into that apple cart. Your other evening games of note are Nebraska at 1-3, hosting Indiana at 3-1 on the Big 12 network. Nothing too special there, but worth noting, I suppose. Duke at 3-1 is hosting Virginia at 2-2 at 7:30 on ESPN3 as the Dukies try to stay on track there with their potent offense. And Virginia, man, Brendan Armstrong has not had the year that he hoped there at quarterback. He's hanging on in a tough road game there. Talk about hanging on. The Mountain West, as we've talked about, has not been a strong conference. And Wyoming at 3-2 is hosting San Jose State at 2-1 on the CBS Sports Network at 7:30. Maybe one of these teams can get into the mix. Rice is 2-2. They're hosting UAB at 2-1 on ESPN+. Two of the better teams in Conference USA, which also seems wide open with a number of teams, but these are two of them. Also at 7:30, SEC Network will have this lousy Missouri team at 2-2. They're hosting number 1 Georgia at 4-0. Good luck with that. At 8 o'clock, Georgia Tech, who's now looking for a new coach, they're 1-3. They're heading to number 24 Pittsburgh, who's 3-1 on the ACC network. Pittsburgh's had its struggles, and we know if there's a coaching change at Georgia Tech, and this intern coach and the staff knows they're about to be wiped out and not just auditioning for a job, it's possible we see some weird changes there that may make them a difficult road team to deal with. But other than that, Pittsburgh will probably blow them out. So, just worth noting, ranked team there. And finally, onto the late night slate, which is not quite as deep as we've had the past couple of weeks. At 9:30, and this is the Pac-12 network again, squirreling games away, but they picked a good one to hide from us. 2-2 Arizona's hosting 0-4 Colorado. Arizona's 18-point favorites at home in this game. That should tell you how horrific it is. Not sure about the quality of Arizona there, although they're continuing to improve. But Colorado is just so devastatingly horrible right now. 10:30, Arizona State looking for a head coach. They're 1-3, looking for a win at USC. That's going to be tough. Trojans are number 6. They're 4-0. They're on ESPN. They struggled against Oregon State last week. I expect Lincoln Riley tried to iron some things out and will really be taking it out on the Sun Devils. Nevertheless, if you want to watch USC on a network, you can actually see them. ESPN, 10:30, and hosting Arizona State. 11 o'clock, this game's kind of interesting to me. Oregon's number 13. They're 3-1. They're hosting Stanford. They're 1-2 on FS1. Now, Stanford's tied for second fewest penalties in the entire country. They have a steady quarterback there in Tanner McGee, but they have had a hell of a lot of issues. They have a -10 turnover margin, tied for worst in the country. They're horrific in the red zone, including the USC game, where I believe they had 2 turnovers in the red zone. And it's going to be just tough for them to score. But they did beat Oregon last season in their 3-9 year. So they're able to pull these upsets, and they'll have a lot of opportunities for it this year with so many good teams in the conference. I'm not sure that Oregon's going to be one of them, though, although they are a Jekyll and Hyde in their own right. Oregon's the only team that's not given up a sack. It's incredible. It's both indicative of their great ability and indicative of Bo Nix's ability to be evasive and get out of the pocket and to avoid getting hit and throw the ball away. However, it'd be nice if he got whacked once in a while, perhaps, to show him that moving out of the pocket and making some horrific reads and throwing the ball to the wrong team is not such a great thing. Because for his great stat line he had last week against Washington State, he did some really, really dumb things. For every great thing he does, there's some bad with it, which is what got him escorted out of Auburn. Is it possible that Stanford goes on the road here to beat Oregon? Obviously not a very good strong chance of that, but Oregon's only favored by 17 points. That's just not very high. It shows very little belief overall in Oregon. USC's favored by 25.5 at home against Arizona State, but at least Stanford's got a permanent coach right now. I'd just like to note as a quick edit, Sunday, October 2nd. So there are 2 games officially moved to that slot now. So noon on ESPN Plus is the Florida Eastern Washington game. That's Florida at 2-2, Eastern Washington at 1-2. Gators should chomp on the birds here. Again, that was moved from noon on Saturday to noon on Sunday, unfortunately on ESPN Plus. The UCF SMU game is scheduled for 1 o'clock. That does not currently have a network assigned. I assume it will be with the ESPN family of networks. All right, top watches of the week. Here we go. Your top weekday watch is an easy one. It's that 10:30 Friday night game. Number 15, Washington, heading to UCLA to play in the Rose Bowl on ESPN. A battle of 2 unbeaten squads. Should be points. 2 good quarterbacks. We will have a 5-0 squad coming out. UCLA's schedule after this is home against Utah and at Oregon. So they're going to get the tough ones kind of in a row here. And Washington, on the other hand, will play at Arizona State, home against Arizona, and at Cal before playing a couple tougher games. But they miss out on USC and Utah as well. So Washington, a win here, and things start to really open up for them, whereas things start to get really difficult for UCLA. So this could be a good barometer. We will see what can happen on Friday night. Big game, big weekday watch. Your must-watch game of the week, as I already stated, number 5, Clemson hosting number 10, NC State, can really help determine who the best squad in the whole conference is, although it looks like we may have some teams knocking each other out if Clemson were to go down. But that is ABC 7:30 on Saturday. Big game. Which defense is going to come alive? Can Clemson's defensive front really do some damage? They should have more health in the secondary, so we'll see if they can slow down the Huskies at all. My audible game is going to be Tulsa at 2-2, hosting Cincinnati at 3-1 at 7 o'clock on ESPNU. Not as much depth in the evening slots as far as big games outside of NC State Clemson, so this will be a good one. Can Cincinnati continue to roll at Tulsa? A bigger game on the road. A lot of these American conferences are big games. So will Cincinnati be able to continue to win here in a feisty game against the Tulsa Golden Hurricanes? My underrated game, and I now key in on all my underrated games, so this is even a difficult category to differentiate, but that loaded afternoon slate still has the 3:30 undefeated Kansas City Jayhawks, who are unranked, playing an unranked Iowa State 3-1 football team on ESPN2. A couple of interesting quarterbacks. Kansas State, the feel-good team of the year so far. Will they be able to keep it up? Again, the stadium will be rocking. Even with Utah, Oregon State, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Wake Forest, Florida State, and the other game, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, all on at the same time as this one. This is still going to be one of the most underrated games on that radar at the time. Your check-in game, still in that time slot. Maybe, a lot of action is going to be going on. Some of these will get a little out of hand, but maybe flip over to the ACC network as well in that 3:30. Check out North Carolina and Virginia Tech. Again, somehow the Hokies are holding up in there, and that's not saying much at 500 and leading their division. North Carolina, Drake May is a monster at quarterback, and he's going to have to keep throwing the ball because that defense is causing, no problems is the problem. It's giving up tons of points, tons of yardage to everybody, including Notre Dame, who put up 40-plus points last week. So North Carolina could still be a force in the ACC, but only on one side of the ball. Virginia Tech could continue to advance in their division, surprisingly. So keep an eye on that ACC network match. Now, my small screen pick was very difficult. There's lots of good non-Power 5 matchups, lots of interesting teams, because there's been a lot of turmoil this year, lots of upsets. I could even go through time slot by time slot, day by day. Friday, 7:30, CBS Sports Network. That's the UTSA and Middle Tennessee game. That'd probably be my top pick, but I do try to keep it on Saturdays. In the noon slot, Memphis and Temple is on ESPNU. The 3:30, Central Michigan, Toledo on the NFL Network. The 7 o'clock is Cincinnati at Tulsa on ESPNU. If I was going by time slots and days, that's what I'd be selecting. That even roll over into the Sunday game where you have Central Florida and SMU now. But for now, I go Temple and Memphis on ESPNU at noon. That's the thinner time slot. Obviously, that 3:30 is stacked. I already have Cincinnati for a category, and UTSA you should be watching anyway on Friday because all those games are going to be pretty interesting. So Temple at Memphis, ESPNU at noon is my small screen pick, although I have several intriguing matchups in front of me. And my late night snack, that's an easy one. Only 3 options to pick from here. One of them, the bad one, scroll away on the Pac-12 network. Anyway, so Oregon hosting Stanford, and the Cardinals are going to be feisty. Oregon's got a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on there. So the FS1, 11 o'clock, Stanford at 1-2 at number 13, Oregon, who's 3-1, is your late night snack for this Saturday evening, week 5 of college football. Again, we will see more undefeated teams falling out of the herd, thinning the herd, I should say. And prayers out to those in Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, the Carolinas, all those affected by Hurricane Ian, as we continue to see a fluid college football schedule. But more importantly, hope everyone is safe out there. Thank you. Enjoy your football watching.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beater turn into a Bentley. See, I'm stunned, so I'm all I'm thinking, please don't tell me.